The first time I saw Marcus Kane step into our diplomatic chamber, I genuinely thought someone had made a terrible mistake. Here was this human, wearing what looked like clothes he grabbed from a laundry basket, carrying a beaten-up tablet that probably cost less than my breakfast, and sporting the kind of stubble that suggested he'd either forgotten to shave or simply didn't care. "This is our linguistic specialist," I whispered to my aide, Thex9, who was frantically checking his datapad for what had to be an error in the personnel files. "According to the records, yes, sir." Thex9 replied, his voice carrying that particular tone of bureaucratic panic. Marcus Kane, age 34, fluent in over 200 galactic languages, including 17 dead dialects. I watched as this unremarkable human shuffled past 3 of the most powerful alien delegations in known space, completely oblivious to the fact that the Zeltharian ambassador was staring at him like he'd just crawled out of a garbage compactor, which, given his appearance, wasn't entirely unreasonable. "Well," I muttered, adjusting my ceremonial robes, "this should be interesting." The Galactic Council had been trying to negotiate the Kepler Treaty for 6 months. 6 months of deadlock, 6 months of increasingly creative insults being hurled across the negotiation table, and 6 months of me wondering if my career in diplomacy was about to end in spectacular failure. The treaty was supposed to establish mining rights for the newly discovered trilithium deposits on Kepler 438b, but every species involved seemed more interested in proving how superior their civilization was than actually reaching an agreement. The Zeltharians, with their 8-foot frames and skin that looked like polished marble, considered themselves the pinnacle of evolved intelligence. The Makari delegation, resembling what would happen if you crossed a praying mantis with a philosophy professor, believed their 1,000-year lifespans gave them inherent wisdom. And the the Vorthack looked like they could bench press a small moon and had the temperament to match. Enter Marcus Kane, who apparently thought flip-flops were appropriate footwear for intergalactic diplomacy. Excuse me," he said, raising his hand like a student asking permission to use the bathroom. "I think there might be a translation error in section 47. Ambassador Velkoth of the Zeltharians turned his massive head toward the human, his silver eyes narrowing to slits. "I beg your pardon? The Makari delegation keeps using the phrase temporal precedence, but in your language, you are hearing inherited authority. The Vorthack are interpreting it as strength through age. Basically, you're all arguing about completely different things." The chamber fell silent. You know, that kind of silence that happens right before either something brilliant occurs or someone gets vaporized. Yeah, that kind. I leaned forward in my seat, suddenly very interested in what this scruffy human had to say. "Continue, Mr. Kane." Marcus scratched his head, looking around the room like he just noticed where he was. "Well, the thing is, when the Makari say temporal precedence, they mean that time itself validates their claim. It's not about age or inheritance. It's about the natural order of the universe. They are basically saying that because they have been spacefaring longer, the cosmos itself supports their position. That's..." Ambassador Velkoth paused, his marble-like features shifting slightly. "That's actually quite profound." "Yeah, well, that's not even the weird part," Marcus continued, apparently warming up to his subject. "The Vorthack aren't really arguing about mining rights at all. Their language has this concept called strength honor, which doesn't translate directly. When they say they want mining rights, they're actually proposing a test of worthiness. They think whoever can extract the trilithium most efficiently should get the biggest share." Kretor, the Vorthack representative who looked like he could arm wrestle a black hole, let out what I could only assume was a laugh. It sounded like rocks being ground together in a cement mixer. "The small flesh speaks truth. We care not for papers and words. We care for who can do the work. And here's where it gets really interesting," Marcus said, completely ignoring the fact that he'd just been called small flesh by a being that could probably use him as a toothpick. "The Zeltharians have been arguing from a position of technological superiority, but their language keeps emphasizing elegant solutions. They're not just saying they're better at mining. They're saying they can do it without disrupting the planet's ecosystem." Now I was really paying attention. 6 months of deadlock, And this human in flip-flops was untangling the whole mess in under 10 minutes. Ambassador Velkoth straightened to his full height, which was impressive and slightly terrifying. "You understand our position?" "Sure," Marcus shrugged. "You think the other two species are going to strip mine the planet into cosmic dust. The Makari think they deserve the rights because they have been good cosmic citizens for longer. The Vorthak want to prove they are worthy through action rather than words. Honestly, it's not that complicated once you get past the language barriers." Hive speaker Zen of the Makari delegation made a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze, which I'd learned was their equivalent of thoughtful consideration. "This human sees clearly. We have indeed been miscommunicating our true intentions. So here's a crazy idea," Marcus said, pulling up something on his batter tablet. "What if instead of fighting over who gets what, you actually work together? The Makari have the longest experience in space mining, so they could oversee the operation. The Zeltharians have the clean technology to keep the planet habitable. The Vorthak have the physical capability to do the actual extraction. Split the profits 3 ways, and everybody wins." The silence that followed was different from the first one. This wasn't the quiet before storm. This was the sound of 3 civilizations realizing they'd been arguing about the wrong things for half a year. "That," I began, then stopped. As chief negotiator, I should probably say something more diplomatic, but honestly, that's brilliant. "Yeah, well," Marcus said, stuffing his tablet back into what looked like a gym bag held together with duct tape and hope. "Sometimes the simplest solution is the best one. Though I have to ask, who thought it was a good idea to hold these negotiations in a room with no windows? The psychological impact of feeling trapped probably made everyone more aggressive than necessary." I glanced around the chamber, suddenly very aware of the oppressive walls and harsh artificial lighting. In 6 months of negotiations, not one of us had thought about the environmental psychology of the space itself. Also, Marcus continued, apparently on a roll now, "You might want to consider the cultural significance of the seating arrangement. The Zeltharians value hierarchy, so they should be seated highest. The Makari prefer circular discussions, so they should be in the center. The Vorthak need to feel they can move freely, so they should have the most space. Right now, you have got everyone arranged like they are waiting for a dental appointment." "Thanks." Nine was frantically taking notes, his stylus moving so fast across his datapad that I worried he might set it on fire. "Mr. Kane," I said slowly, "how long did it take you to analyze all of this?" Marcus checked what appeared to be an ancient wristwatch. "About 15 minutes? I mean, I read the files on the way over, but most of it was pretty obvious once you listened to how each delegation was actually speaking versus what the translators were saying they meant. 15 minutes. 6 months of deadlock, resolved in 15 minutes by a human who looked like he'd gotten dressed in the dark. There is, however, one small problem," Marcus added, and something in his tone made my diplomatic instincts start screaming warnings. "What kind of problem?" Ambassador Velkoth asked, his silver eyes beginning to glow with what I recognized as Zeltharian suspicion. "Well," Marcus said, scratching behind his ear, "it seems like there's a 4th party involved in this whole situation. Someone who really doesn't want this treaty to succeed." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. "Explain," Creator rumbled, his massive hands clenching in a fist that could probably punch through starship hulls. "I've been monitoring the communication channels during the negotiations," Marcus said, pulling out his tablet again. "Someone's been feeding each delegation information designed to make the others look unreasonable. Subtle stuff, mostly. A mistranslated phrase here, a cultural misunderstanding there. Nothing obvious enough to detect, unless you were specifically looking for it." Hive speaker Zen's wind chime voice took on a distinctly darker tone. "You suggest sabotage?" "I don't suggest anything," Marcus replied. "I'm telling you, someone has been actively working to prevent this treaty from happening. And based on the communication patterns, they're not just observing the negotiations. They are in this room." Every eye in the chamber turned toward the human, who was calmly scrolling through data on his ancient tablet like he'd just announced the weather forecast, rather than accuse someone of intergalactic espionage. That's a serious accusation, Mr. Kane, I said, my voice carefully neutral while my mind raced through the implications. Do you have evidence? Oh, tons, Marcus said cheerfully. Intercepted messages, pattern analysis, communication, timing correlations. Whoever's doing this is good. But they made one crucial mistake, which was Ambassador Velkoff asked, his marble features now radiating the kind of controlled menace that had made the Zeltharians legendary negotiators. Marcus looked up from his tablet, and for the first time since entering the chamber, his expression was completely serious. They assumed no one would be paying attention to the linguistic patterns. They focused on the content of the sabotage, but they didn't think about how their interference would affect the natural flow of language evolution during extended negotiations. I had no idea what that meant, but it sounded important. When three species spend 6 months trying to communicate, Marcus continued, their languages start to adapt to each other. Words get borrowed, phrases get modified, communication patterns shift. It's natural linguistic evolution. But someone's been artificially maintaining the barriers, keeping the mistranslations fresh, preventing the natural adaptation that should have happened months ago. And this tells you, Creator prompted, his voice like distant thunder. This tells me that whoever's doing it has access to the real-time translation systems, understands all 3 languages well enough to manipulate them, and has been present for every single negotiation session. Marcus smiled, and suddenly that scruffy, harmless-looking human seemed a lot less harmless. It also tells me that they are about to make a very big mistake. The chamber's main doors suddenly sealed with a hiss of escaping atmosphere, and the emergency lighting activated, bathing everything in an ominous red glow. Well, Marcus said, apparently unconcerned by the fact that we were now trapped in a locked room with failing life support. That was faster than I expected. That's when the shooting started. The energy blast came from the ventilation shafts above us, which was both creative and deeply inconvenient. Purple bolts of what I assumed was some form of plasma weaponry rained down while we all scrambled for cover behind the negotiation furniture. Well, this is new, Marcus said conversationally, ducking behind an overturned table next to me. Usually when my translations go wrong, people just storm out angrily. This is definitely an escalation. A blast scorched the floor inches from my head, filling the air with the smell of melted metal and ozone. Mr. Kane, please tell me you have a plan that doesn't involve us all becoming decorative carbon smears. Actually, he replied, tapping something on his tablet while energy bolts continued to rain down around us. But it's going to require some trust, a lot of luck, and Ambassador Velkoff doing something that's probably going to violate several Zeltharian cultural taboos. From across the room, hunched behind what used to be the Makari delegation's ceremonial seating, Velkoff's voice boomed over the weapon's fire. What kind of taboos, human? The kind where you have to trust a Vorthack's judgment about structural engineering. Creator, who had flipped an entire conference table on its side for cover, let out another of those cement mixer laughs. Small flesh speaks wisdom. Creator knows weak points in this chamber. This is madness. Hive speaker, Zen, chimed from behind a decorative pillar that was rapidly being reduced to decorative rubble. We cannot coordinate an escape while under fire. Sure we can, Marcus said, doing something incredibly stupid by poking his head up to scan the ceiling. We just need to change the conversation. A blast singed the air where his head had been a second before. I grabbed his shoulder and yanked him back down. What are you talking about? Look, whoever's shooting at us is listening to our communications. They know what we are planning because they can hear us planning it. But what if we planned in a language they couldn't understand? They have demonstrated fluency in all our languages. I hissed, flinching as another volley peppered the area around our makeshift barricade. All our standard languages, sure. But what about a hybrid? Marcus was grinning now, which was either a very good sign or a very bad one. Possibly both. During 6 months of negotiations, you have all been unconsciously developing a pigeon communication system. Words borrowed from each other's languages, grammatical structures that blend your natural patterns, even gestural elements. It's basic xenolinguistic evolution, but it's unique to this specific group. Another round of weapons fire forced us all lower behind our increasingly inadequate cover. You want us to invent a new language? Right now, Velkoth's voice carried a note of disbelief that probably translated across species barriers. Not invent. Use. You have already been creating it for months. I've been documenting the whole process. Marcus held up his battered tablet, which somehow was still functioning despite the combat zone we were trapped in. Creator, in your language, what's the word for sealing weakness? Krethdal, the Vort hack bellowed back without hesitation. Velkoth, how do you say coordinate strike? Zen Makthul, and Zen, what's your phrase for precise timing? Philoxen. Perfect. Now here's where it gets interesting. Over the past 6 months, you have all started blending those concepts. Creator, you have been saying Krethmakthul when you mean structural attack point. Velkoth, you have started using Zenilok for synchronized action. Zen, you have incorporated Dalsun for a critical moment. The weapon's fire paused, probably because our attackers were reloading or repositioning. In the brief quiet, I could hear Marcus's tablet beeping as he pulled up files. You have been unconsciously creating a tactical communication system that's specific to this group, and I doubt our friends upstairs have had 6 months to study it. So we coordinate our escape using this hybrid language. I asked, finally beginning to understand where he was going with this. Better than that, we coordinate a counterattack. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of energy weapons being recharged somewhere in the ventilation system above us. Counterattack. Hive speaker Zen's voice carried a note of what I was pretty sure was excitement. Against technologically superior opponents with superior positioning. Well, when you put it like that, it sounds crazy, Marcus admitted. But here's the thing. Our attackers made the same mistake a lot of people make when dealing with different species. They assumed they understood our capabilities. Explain, créateur humblit. They have been monitoring our negotiations for months. They know Zeltharians are master strategists. Makari are exceptional at complex planning, and Vorthak are incredibly strong. What they don't know is what happens when you combine all three. Marcus peeked around the edge of his cover, studying the ceiling. Creator, Krethdal the support beams at coordinates, he rattled off a series of numbers that meant nothing to me, but apparently made perfect sense to the Vorthak. Velkoth, Zenilok your people's defensive protocols with Makari timing predictions. Zen, Tiloxen calculation for optimal strike moment. And what will you be doing during this improvised assault? I asked, because someone had to be the voice of reason in this increasingly unreasonable situation. Me? I'm going to do what I do best. I'm going to talk to people. Before anyone could ask what that meant, Marcus stood up completely exposed in the middle of an active firefight. Hey, he shouted toward the ceiling. This is Marcus Kane, human linguistic specialist. I'd like to file a formal complaint about the working conditions. The weapon's fire stopped. Actually stopped. You've got to be kidding me, I muttered. Marcus Kane. A voice echoed from the ventilation system, speaking in heavily accented standard Galactic. You are not supposed to be this perceptive. Yeah, well, I get that a lot. Who am I talking to? Someone who has invested considerable resources in preventing this treaty. Right, but that's not really an answer, is it? I mean, you have gone to a lot of trouble here. Professional sabotage operation, real-time linguistic manipulation, hidden weapons systems. This isn't some freelance operation. You are representing someone important. While Marcus chatted casually with our would-be assassins, I noticed the other delegates were moving. Creator was positioning himself near specific structural points. Velkoth was making subtle hand signals that probably meant something tactical in Zeltharian culture, and Zen was doing whatever it was that Makari did when they were planning something complicated. The Kepler system contains resources that certain parties believe should not be jointly exploited, the voice continued. So this is about territorial control. Let me guess, someone with existing claims in that sector who doesn't want competition? Someone with enough political influence to sabotage a major galactic treaty, but not enough military power to simply take what they want by force. Your analysis is accurate. Thanks, I try. Here's the thing, though. You made a mistake. Indeed, you assumed that stopping this treaty would solve your problem. But what you have actually done is prove that the three most powerful species in this part of the galaxy can work together when threatened. Congratulations, you have just created the exact alliance you were trying to prevent. There was a long pause from above. When the voice spoke again, it carried a note of uncertainty. Explain. Well, you see, the Zeltharians now know that someone considers them enough of a threat to sabotage their negotiations. The Makari have learned that their careful diplomatic approach can be undermined by violence. And the Vorthack, Marcus glanced at Kretor, who was grinning in a way that showed far too many teeth. The Vorthack have discovered that someone thinks they can be intimidated. This changes nothing. The treaty negotiations have failed. Have they, though? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like we have just negotiated the most successful alliance in galactic history. Shared enemies tend to do that. That's when Kretor moved. I'd heard about Vorthack speed, but seeing it was something else entirely. One moment he was crouched behind cover. The next he was hurling himself at specific points in the ceiling with precision that would have impressed a ballistics computer. The support beam he hit first crumpled like paper. The second one folded in half. The third one simply disintegrated under the impact. The ceiling began to collapse in a very controlled, very deliberate manner. Velkoth's strategic planning became evident. The debris fell in exactly the right pattern to expose the hidden attackers while providing cover for us below. Zen's timing calculations proved flawless. The moment the first attacker was exposed, energy blasts from Zeltharian security forces flooded the chamber from previously sealed entrances. You see, Marcus said, brushing dust off his shirt as armed Zeltharian guards swarmed the room. The thing about being a translator is that you learn to listen to what people aren't saying. And what our mysterious friends up there weren't saying was that they had an exit strategy. I looked around at the captured attackers being dragged from the wreckage, then at the three alien delegations who were already discussing joint security arrangements and shared intelligence protocols. Mr. Kane, I said slowly, did you just accidentally create an interspecies military alliance? Accidentally? Marcus checked his ancient wristwatch again. I've been working on this for 3 hours. The linguistic analysis, the sabotage detection, even the seating arrangement complaints. I figured if I could create a situation where all three species had to trust each other under pressure, they'd realize they made a pretty good team. 3 hours? Well, 6 months if you count the background research. But I've been actively implementing the plan for about 3 hours. I stared at him. You orchestrated this entire situation. Not the attack, obviously. That was a bonus. But the rest of it? Yeah, pretty much. Marcus grinned and held up his tablet, which was now displaying what looked like a complete psychological and linguistic profile of every person in the room. Turns out, when you really understand how people communicate, you can predict how they will react to almost anything, including how they will react to nearly being killed. Especially that. Nothing builds trust like surviving something together. As if to prove his point, Ambassador Velkoth approached our small group, followed by Kretor and Hive speakers in. Mr. Kane, Velkoth said formally, the Zeltharian Consortium would like to offer you a position as permanent liaison for interspecies relations. The Vorthack clans second this proposal. Kretor rumbled. Small flesh has proven strength wisdom. The Makari Assembly agrees. Zen chimed in harmoniously. Your understanding of communication surpasses our expectations. Marcus looked around at the three most powerful species in known space, all offering him what amounted to one of the most influential positions in galactic politics. Thanks, but I think I will stick to translation work. It's more interesting when people don't know what you're really doing. He gathered up his battered tablet and gym bag, apparently ready to leave. Oh, and the treaty you were negotiating? You might want to add a clause about joint security operations. Something tells me you're going to need it. As Marcus Kane walked toward the exit, stepping over debris and nodding politely to armed guards, I realized something that probably should have been obvious from the start. He wasn't just a translator. He was someone who understood that the most powerful weapon in the galaxy wasn't technology or strength or ancient wisdom. IT was the ability to make people understand each other. The applause started with Kretor, a slow, rhythmic clapping that echoed through the damaged chamber. Velkoth joined in, followed by Zen, then the guards, then me.b. By the time Marcus reached the door, the entire room was applauding a human who had walked in looking like he'd gotten dressed in a thrift store and was walking out covered in dust and debris, having just reshaped galactic politics. "Mr. Kane," I called after him. Was any of that translation work actually necessary? He paused at the threshold and looked back with that same scruffy, harmless expression he'd worn when he first entered. "Every word," he said. "I just translated it into action." The door closed behind him, leaving the rest of us to contemplate the fact that sometimes the most extraordinary people are the ones who look completely ordinary, at least until they start talking. But Marcus Kane wasn't quite finished with us yet. The door chimed and slid open again. Marcus poked his head back into the chamber, looking slightly embarrassed. "Sorry, forgot something," he said, walking back toward the wreckage where his tablet had been sitting. "Also, you might want to check the communication logs from the past hour. I may have accidentally recorded a confession from our attackers that implicates about half the Galactic Mining Consortium's board of directors." I felt my diplomatic instinct start screaming again. Half the board, give or take. Turns out this wasn't just about Kepler 438b. Someone's been systematically sabotaging mining treaties across 3 sectors to artificially inflate trilithium prices. The attack on this negotiation was just the latest in a pattern going back 2 years. Velkoth's marble features had gone completely rigid, which in Zeltharian body language meant he was either about to faint or declare war. Possibly both. "You're saying this was economic manipulation on a galactic scale?" Hive speaker Zen asked, her wind chime voice taking on harmonics I'd never heard before. "That's exactly what I'm saying. And now you have 3 of the most powerful military forces in known space with documented evidence, and a really good reason to be angry about it." Kreator's grin had evolved beyond merely showing too many teeth. It now suggested he was contemplating the recreational value of demolishing corporate headquarters with his bare hands. "The Galactic Mining Consortium," he rumbled thoughtfully, "has many installations that require structural evaluation." "Now hold on," I said, because someone had to be the adult in this increasingly volatile situation. "We can't just declare war on a corporate entity because of economic manipulation." "Why not?" Marcus asked, genuinely curious. "I mean, they just tried to kill all of you to protect their profit margins. That seems like a pretty clear declaration of hostile intent. There are proper diplomatic channels for this sort of thing." "Sure there are. And in about 6 months, after those channels have been thoroughly explored, you'll have a strongly worded resolution condemning their actions while they continue manipulating galactic markets." Marcus held up his tablet, which was displaying what looked like financial records that probably weren't supposed to exist. Or you could use the fact that you have just formed the most powerful military alliance in this part of the galaxy to send a message that economic terrorism isn't going to be tolerated. "What kind of message?" Velkoth asked, his strategic mind clearly already working through possibilities. "The kind where you show up at their corporate headquarters with 3 fleets and politely request they explain their recent business practices. In person, with full transparency, and maybe some reparations for the attempted murder." "That's extortion," I pointed out. "No, that's justice with proper documentation," Marcus corrected. "Extortion would be threatening them without cause. This is demanding accountability for crimes they have already committed." Thex, 9, who had been frantically taking notes throughout this entire conversation, suddenly looked up from his datapad. "Sir, the communication intercepts Mr. Kane mentioned. They are legitimate. I'm seeing financial transfers, strategic planning documents, even personnel assignments for the attack team." "How much evidence are we talking about?" I asked, beginning to suspect that my day was about to get much more complicated. "Enough to prosecute about 40% of the consortium's leadership," Marcus said cheerfully. "Also enough to prove that at least 6 other mining treaties were sabotaged using similar methods. Oh, and there's some really interesting stuff about market manipulation and artificial scarcity schemes." The chamber fell silent again, but this was a different kind of quiet. This was the sound of 4 civilizations realizing that they'd just stumbled into something much bigger than a simple mining dispute. "Mr. Kane," Ambassador Velkoth said slowly, "How long have you known about this? About the specific details?" "Since I started analyzing the sabotage patterns 3 hours ago." "About the general situation?" Marcus shrugged. "I have been tracking linguistic anomalies in corporate communications for about 2 years. It's a hobby. A hobby? Well, more a side project. See, when corporate executives are lying about large-scale operations, their language patterns change in predictable ways. Increased use of passive voice, deliberately vague terminology, statistical obfuscation techniques. It's actually pretty easy to spot once you know what to look for. And you've been doing this analysis for 2 years without reporting it to anyone." "I did report it. Filed formal complaints with the Galactic Trade Commission, the Interspecies Commerce Authority, and the Corporate Ethics Board." "Want to guess how many responses I got?" The answer, judging by his expression, was 0. So I decided to wait for an opportunity where the information might actually be useful. Like, say, when the victims of their manipulation were in a position to do something about it. Creator had been listening to this exchange with growing enthusiasm. Small flesh planned revenge operation. Not revenge. Justice. Revenge would be personal. This is about preventing them from doing it to anyone else. "What exactly are you proposing?" I asked, though I was beginning to suspect I already knew. "Simple. The three of you now have legal authority to investigate crimes against your respective governments. You have documented evidence of those crimes. You have the military capability to enforce compliance with your investigation. And you have a really good reason to cooperate with each other." Marcus gestured toward the damaged ceiling and the debris scattered around the chamber. "They try to solve their problem with violence. You solve your problem with cooperation. Seems like the universe is trying to tell you something about which approach works better. You want us to launch a joint investigation?" Hive speaker Zen asked. "I want you to launch a joint enforcement action. There's a difference, which is an investigation asks politely for information and waits for answers. Enforcement shows up with documentation and demands compliance immediately." Velkoth was studying the financial records on Marcus's tablet with the focused intensity of someone who is really good at strategic planning. "The legal framework for this would be complex, but not impossible. If we can establish joint jurisdiction—" "Already done," Marcus interrupted. "All three of your governments have existing treaties with the Galactic Trade Commission that give you enforcement authority in cases of economic crimes against your citizens. The consortium's actions qualify under all three legal frameworks. You have researched the legal precedents." I asked, impressed despite myself. "I have done more than that. I have drafted the enforcement warrants, calculated the probable reparations owed to each government, and identified the specific installations that need to be investigated." Marcus pulled out what looked like a completely different tablet from his bag. This one significantly more advanced than the beaten-up device he'd been using earlier. "Wait a minute," I said, staring at the new hardware. "How many tablets do you have?" "Just the two. The old one is for routine translation work. This one is for serious business." The serious business tablet was displaying what appeared to be detailed schematics of consortium facilities, complete with security assessments and tactical recommendations. "Mr. Kane," Velkoth said carefully, "what exactly is your actual job?" "Officially? Freelance linguistic consultant." "Unofficially?" Marcus grinned. "Let's just say that when the Galactic Council needs someone to solve problems that can't be solved through normal diplomatic channels, they know who to call. You are an intelligence operative. I'm a translator who happens to be very good at understanding what people are really saying. Sometimes that involves languages. Sometimes it involves financial records. Sometimes it involves figuring out why three powerful species are having trouble reaching an agreement that should be simple. And sometimes it involves orchestrating military alliances to take down corrupt corporations." "Well, that's new, but I'm adaptable." Thex, 9 was still frantically taking notes, but now his stylus was moving so fast it was practically smoking. "Sir, the implications of this are significant." "How significant?" I asked. "If we proceed with joint enforcement action based on this evidence, we are essentially establishing a new model for interspecies law enforcement. This could reshape how galactic commerce operates." "That's the idea." Marcus said. Right now, corporations can play different species against each other because there's no unified response to economic crimes. But if the major powers start working together, corporate crime becomes a lot riskier, Velkoth finished, and a lot less profitable, Kretor added with satisfaction. The Makari Assembly would support such an initiative, Hive speakers announced. Economic stability benefits all civilizations. The Vorthak clans agree. Strength shared is strength multiplied. The Zeltharian Consortium finds merit in this approach. All eyes turn to me. As the original mediator of these negotiations, my opinion would carry significant weight in whatever happened next. I looked around the damage chamber, at the 3 alien delegations who had gone from deadlock to alliance in a matter of hours, at the evidence of corporate manipulation and attempted murder, at the scruffy human who had somehow orchestrated the entire situation. Well, I said finally, I suppose someone has to make sure this enforcement action follows proper diplomatic protocols. Marcus's grin widened. Does that mean you are in? That means I'm terrified of what you people might do without proper supervision. Fair enough. So when do we start? I asked. Well, you're going to need a translator for all the corporate interrogations. And I do speak their language. Which language is that? Marcus held up the advanced tablet, which was now displaying what appeared to be detailed financial projections showing exactly how much money the consortium stood to lose if their manipulation schemes were exposed. The only language they really understand. Profit and loss. 3 hours later, I found myself aboard a Zeltharian flagship, watching as the largest joint military operation in galactic history prepared to launch. The target was the Galactic Mining Consortium's primary headquarters in the Vega system, and the mission was to serve enforcement warrants that would make corporate history. Marcus Kane sat in the communications center, wearing what appeared to be an official translator's uniform that looked suspiciously well-tailored for someone who supposedly lived out of a gym bag. His beaten-up tablet had been replaced with standard military communication equipment, and he was coordinating with legal teams from 3 different species with the efficiency of someone who had done this before. You know, I said, settling into the observer's seat next to him, I'm starting to think there's more to your story than freelance translation work. Maybe a little, Marcus admitted, but the important thing is that it worked. 3 species who couldn't agree on mining rights are now working together to reform galactic commerce law. That's not bad for a day's work. And if the consortium decides to fight back. Marcus gestured toward the tactical display, which showed 3 of the most powerful fleets in known space moving in perfect coordination toward their target. Then they will learn what happens when you try to solve diplomatic problems with violence instead of conversation. The communication array chimed with an incoming message from the consortium headquarters. Marcus accepted the call, and suddenly we were looking at a very nervous-looking executive who clearly hadn't expected to see military vessels approaching his station. This is Director Vance of the Galactic Mining Consortium. State your business. This is Marcus Kane, linguistic specialist and translator for the Joint Zeltharian-Mokuri-Vorthak Enforcement Fleet. We are here to serve legal warrants regarding economic crimes against member governments and to conduct formal interviews with your leadership team. We don't recognize your authority to Director Vance. Marcus interrupted politely. You might want to check your legal database. Specifically, Article 47 of the Galactic Trade Commission Charter, which grants enforcement authority to member governments in cases of economic manipulation. Also, you should probably review the evidence files I'm transmitting to your legal department right now. There was a long pause as Vance presumably checked whatever Marcus had sent him. These charges are ridiculous. We demand, Director Vance, you demanded something 2 hours ago when you tried to murder a diplomatic negotiation. That didn't work out very well for you. I'd suggest trying cooperation this time. Another pause, longer this time. What exactly do you want? Full financial records for all mining operations in Sectors 7 through 12 for the past 3 years. Personnel files for everyone involved in the sabotage operations. Detailed accounting of all market manipulation activities. Informal statements from your board of directors regarding their knowledge of these activities. That's commercially sensitive information. That's evidence in a criminal investigation. You can provide it voluntarily, or we can seize it during a formal inspection of your facilities. Your choice. I watched as Director Vance's expression shifted from indignation to concern to resignation. On the tactical display, I could see consortium security forces standing down as the reality of their situation became clear. How long do we have to compile this information? You have until our boarding parties finish docking. So about 15 minutes. 15 minutes? That's impossible. Then I guess you'd better start with the most important files. Marcus closed the communication channel and leaned back in his chair, looking satisfied. You enjoy this, don't you? I asked. I enjoy watching bullies realize they are not as powerful as they thought. There's something poetic about it. And what happens next? Next, we revolutionize galactic commerce law, establish new precedents for interspecies cooperation, and probably prevent about a dozen more wars that would have been started by corporate manipulation. Just like that, Marcus shrugged. Sometimes the biggest changes come from the smallest conversations. You just have to know how to translate them into action. As our fleet moved into position around the consortium headquarters, I realized that I had witnessed something remarkable. Not just the birth of a new alliance, but the emergence of a completely different approach to solving galactic problems. Marcus Kane might have looked like a scruffy translator when he walked into our chamber, but he had walked out as something else entirely. Someone who understood that the most powerful weapon in the universe wasn't technology or strength or ancient wisdom, that IT was the ability to help people understand what they were really fighting about, and then show them a better way to fight for it. The applause when we finally returned to the diplomatic station 3 days later was deafening. But by then, Marcus Kane had already disappeared, probably on his way to the next impossible situation that needed a translator or maybe a revolutionary. With Marcus Kane, it was sometimes hard to tell the difference.